This is part 3 of the series where I'm talking about my memories in childhood. And this is when we lived on what we called the old home place. And that was because Grandma and Granddad used to live there. And we came to live there when I was 13, and we lived there. Well, I lived there till age 17, basically my high school years, and then I went on to college. And Mother and Dad and my sisters kept living at that same place, and in fact, Mother still lives there. The old home place is a really wonderful farm because there's an enormous bank where the Indians used to have their lookouts on top of that big, tall bank, and sometimes they would make their arrowheads there. And along the lane is a little hump, which is where they had the first dugout when they came to homestead that farm years and years ago in the 1800s. There's a little creek, Otter Creek it's called, that flows around the farm, and there's lots of waterfalls, and you can always hear it whenever you're outside. You can hear the waterfalls. It's a very, very comforting sound, a very lovely, meditative sound. We had mostly wheat and feed on the farm, not so many animals this time. And of course we still had our dog, Jeff, and our cat, Polly. They came with us to the new house. And these were basically my high school years. And so with high school I started to study a whole lot more, and because the classes were harder, and I would say my approach to life and everything really gelled when I was a sophomore. I started a lot more writing, and my writing started to sound a little bit like my grown-up self. In my sophomore year, I took English and German from Mrs. Mendrup, and she was a real stickler for detail, so I learned it really, really well. And that was really where I got my love for languages and linguistics, was through that study, and also further study that I did to try to compete in the Kansas scholarship tests. The other good thing about high school was they had an enormous library and new books, so I could read lots more books, and I really got a lot out of the books, especially the biographies. I read many biographies of inspiring people, and it really helped me in my life. I had some extracurricular activities. I worked on the yearbook, and also I did some sewing. Mrs. Bourne was my sewing teacher in home ec, and she was a very tall woman. And I remember one time I had cut out some skirt fabric and was getting ready to sew it, and Mrs. Bourne came over and she said, "Oh no, you've cut it much too short, it's ruined." And then she got the tape measure and measured, and I was very short, and it was the right length. I had cut it the right length, and we had a good laugh about that. I was going to high school in Lenora, so I had 2 different buses. We had a little bus, which was a feeder bus, and then that would take us over to one corner by the highway, and then then the big bus would stop and take us to high school. I had a lot of homework in school, a lot of homework in school, several hours every night. but it was good. It was good. It really helped me to learn discipline and persistence and to work harder. I don't think I worked very hard in grade school, but I started working harder in high school, which was good for me when I got to college. I also learned to drive during my high school years. I went to driver's ed, and it was all right until we got into the car, and there was a whole bunch of us in the car, and we had to drive on the highway, and it wouldn't have been so bad except the highway had a crown to it, so whenever you turned a little bit, then the car would lean one way or the other, and that frightened me. So when I was driving, I was going like 35 or 40 and thinking I was being very daring. But then the teacher insisted I get up to 60, and it was too much. I just couldn't take it. I did pass driver's ed, but it really frightened me. So Dad decided he would try to teach me to drive. And we still had the 1956 Cadillac, which is a very large car, heavy car, and we lived in the country, so we had gravel roads. And that too had a crown on it. And when you would get up any speed at all, it would slither around it. Oh, it scared me to death. And the worst part of those lessons, he would say, "Joan, relax," and he would reach over and he would rub my neck, which I hated. And the other thing was, sometimes Barbara would be in the back seat, laughing and saying, "Look out! John's going to crash! Oh no! It's terrible!" And I was just a bundle of nerves, I tell you. After that experience, I swore I would never drive. I just wouldn't. And I didn't drive hardly at all until I was 45. And then, now I drive, but I had to learn slower. Nick and I went to parking lots, and we spent several weeks in the parking lot. Even before we started the car, we memorized the different parts of the car, and the heater, and the radio, and the mirrors, and we worked on all that. And eventually I learned how to drive really well. But I just needed a slower classroom, just zooming up to speed, and it just wasn't for me. My bedroom was on the east, which was very wonderful because since we were in the country, we never closed our blinds, and in the morning the east sun would come in, and that was one thing I loved in that bedroom, how the sun came through my blinds every morning. The house had quite a few outbuildings and also 2 mulberry trees, and sometimes we would go pick the mulberries. There were two purple ones and 1 white one, and we would spread out old sheets and then shake the tree, and then we would make jam or eat them fresh. It was really good. And sometimes we had a garden there too, but not always, not all the time. One thing I really liked to do was, when I came home from school, I was sort of tired of people and tired of thinking and tired of working, and I would go up and walk along the pasture and the tall trees, the tall elms, and it was just so peaceful, and it was very calming. And by the time I came back, then I was ready to jump into activity again. I helped with Bible school sometimes as a teacher. I drove the Ford tractor sometimes, pulling some kind of, I forget what, weeder or something, and I really, really enjoyed that. And one winter I helped Dad feed calves. We had to get up at 5:30, and in the wintertime that's still really, really dark. And we would go out and the calves would just be waking up and we would feed them. And it was a beautiful time of the morning because everything would be frosted, all the grass and the weeds and the feed bunks and everything would be all frosted and everything glittered in the moonlight. It was really fun. Mother and I used to sing at funerals sometimes. She was better than I at harmony, so usually I sang soprano and she was alto, but sometimes we did it the other way around. Daddy liked to fly, and so he would take the whole family along to Phillipsburg for his flying lessons. And of course it was more interesting for him than it was for us to wait in the waiting room. But sometimes we got to ride in the airplane, and there were a couple of times that he flew us to Texas to visit our cousins down there. And that was kind of interesting. He always loved to fly, and it's wonderful that he got to do it so much. It really is. One time we went to Ohio to get a school bus. That's because Dad was on the school board, and the school bus factory was in Ohio, and our aunt lived in Ohio. So anyway, we took the train to Dayton. No, I mean Chicago. We took the train to Chicago, and that was quite an experience because, first of all, it was in the heat of summer, and when we got on, it was lovely and cool. The air conditioning was on, but the air conditioner was stuck. It was stuck in an on position, and so as night came on and it got cold, they couldn't turn it down, so it was just freezing. So we were very glad when it was time to wake up in the morning. And what an experience to rattle slowly through the slums of Chicago. It was just really a dismal sight, on and on and on, miles and miles of tenement houses with washing laid out and people just sitting around not working, and it was a sad thing, and we hadn't seen that before. So anyway, we went to the airport and we took a plane to Dayton, from Chicago to Dayton, and that was the first time any of us had ever ridden in a great big plane, and that was fun. And then we stayed with our aunt for a while, and then we drove the school bus back to Kansas, and we hung up our clothes in the windows, and we could sit on any of the seats that we wanted to, and it was really fun. And people would say, "Oh, did you see that school bus with the clothes hanging in it?" You know, and we would stop at truck stops. And one truck stop, as I recall, had a beautiful, beautiful shower, bathroom, all tile, perfectly clean, and showers. And so we took some showers there and got all fixed up for the day and drove all the way back to Kansas. So that was quite an adventure. There was also staying with grandparents and visiting grandparents and enjoying Grandma and Grandpa's rabbits. They always had baby rabbits to play with, and if it was the time of year. One thing is, in wintertime, the creek, of course, would freeze, and we could ice skate down the creek. That was very fun. We we could take turns. We had one pair of ice skates, and we would take turns wearing the ice skates. And we weren't very good, but we had fun. And then the year that I had surgery, I couldn't skate, of course, and so Dad took me down to the creek, and I lay on the sled, and he would pull me on the ice with his sled, and he was skating, and I tell you, it was very thrilling, almost too much, because the ice on the creek is bumpy, and he could go pretty fast, and you were just 5 inches away from the ice, and it was like riding in a Formula One car. I guess that's about it. I did. One of the pretty things about that house was that Uncle Gene had planted lilac bushes all around the house, and that's one thing that we really, really loved. And to this day, that's my very favorite flower, is lilac flower. We have a lilac here, which is very wonderful. So I think that's about it. It was really getting through high school, learning a lot, thinking about college, having one more surgery and getting over that. And once I'd really gotten over that, I was just on the road to college, and I was just thinking about what I would do and looking forward to that. And I hated to leave the farm, though. I really did. It was so pretty, and everywhere you went, you could hear the waterfalls, and I would miss the trees. But anyway, at 17 and a half, I was off to college, and that's the end of my childhood memories.